Reagan Moore froze mid-nod to the school receptionist, her attention snagged by a whispered exchange between her daughter and the janitor. The words, though spoken casually, carried a weight that sliced through the air like shattered glass. Reagan pivoted on her heels, the click of her shoes against the polished tile floor, the only sound in the sudden silence. "What did you just say?" she demanded. The receptionist, startled, stammered, I mean, we weren't sure at first. Ivy doesn't usually speak clearly, but she said something to Mr. Blake. Reagan's gaze sharpened. Mr. Blake? Who? The receptionist inched closer. The janitor. Burst Academy's halls shimmered under a warm amber glow, exuding an air of quiet, generational wealth. Reagan traversed the space with purpose, her heels clicking steadily, her trench coat swaying with each determined stride. She wasn't interested in being impressed. She was here for one thing, to collect Ivy and return to the office before her next client call. Yet, her daughter who rarely spoke, was now seemingly engaged in a whispered conversation with the janitor. She paused before the door to classroom 2B and, peering through the small glass window, Reagan saw Ivy, a 7-year-old in a pale blue dress with blonde curls pulled back behind one ear. She was seated cross-legged on a reading mat, leaning towards a tall man in gray overalls who knelt beside her. Reagan carefully cracked the door open just enough to hear. "See you tomorrow," the girl whispered, and the janitor responded with a smile, not one of patronization or astonishment, but rather a gentle and assured expression. "I'll be right here." Reagan stood motionless. She hadn't encountered Ivy's voice for nearly The year had passed, and not a single person had reached out. Not her friends, not her teachers, not even the therapists who charged more per hour than her own lawyer. But suddenly her daughter was engaged in conversation with a janitor. She flung the door open wider. "Ivy, get your things, we're leaving," she said. The girl jumped, then swiftly gathered her small backpack, holding onto the strap tightly. The janitor, a tall man perhaps in his late 30s or early 40s, with brown hair that was a bit messy and hands worn from labor, also stood up. He didn't grin, just gave a small, polite nod. He stated, "You must be her mother." Reagan's eyes were cold. "You're the janitor who believes he's qualified to give speech therapy," she stated. A fleeting emotion crossed her face, perhaps pain or exhaustion, but it disappeared as rapidly as it appeared. "I'm not thinking anything, ma'am," he replied calmly. "I was simply listening." "Well," she said crisply, "I'd prefer if you left the listening to experts next time." Ivy gently tugged at her mother's coat. "Mom." Reagan's heart skipped a beat. It was Ivy's whisper again, but she suppressed any outward reaction. She didn't have room for emotions right now. "Nope, not here, not at this moment. They departed in silence, making their way through the parking lot. Ivy's tiny steps struggled to keep up with Reagan's long, determined strides. Reagan unlocked the sleek sedan with a beep, and Ivy slid inside without uttering a sound. The engine roared to life, but Reagan didn't move. Her grip on the steering wheel was white-knuckled. Her daughter had spoken to a stranger twice, and Reagan was utterly baffled by the reason why. That evening, Reagan stood in the kitchen of her minimalist City View condo, a glass of red wine in hand and her laptop open before her. Her fingers lingered above the keyboard, poised to. She pressed keys, searching for Gabriel Blake, a name listed under facilities on the Bellhurst Academy staff page. The school website offered little information. No photo, just a name. Her search narrowed. Her legal instincts took over. Gabriel Blake, therapist, New York. A single link caught her attention. An outdated medical journal. Innovative Approaches to Selective Mutism. Case Study. By Gabriel Blake, MS, CCS, LP. She read through it carefully. It revealed he had previously been a licensed speech-language pathologist specializing in pediatric trauma. Numerous awards, along with several published papers, were achieved 4 years prior. There was nothing. No inactive license, no record of practice, no obituary, no scandal. He had simply vanished. Now he was scrubbing floors at Ivy's school. The following day, Reagan bypassed the office and went straight to Burst, arriving just before lunchtime. She requested to see Mr. Blake. He was in the courtyard, crouched beside a water fountain, a wrench in his grip. "Mr. Blake," she called out. He stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. "I researched you," she stated directly. "You were a speech therapist. A skilled one, it seems. Why were you cleaning fountains at a preparatory school?" He hadn't. I flinched. "I prefer quiet places." That wasn't a satisfactory response. He let out a quiet chuckle. "Perhaps I've offered all the answers I possess. Now I simply observe." She folded her arms. "Observe, Mr. Blake Gabe." "What?" "My name is Gabe." His voice held a deep, unwavering quality. There was no arrogance, no hidden motive, just a sense of groundedness. She loathed how effortlessly he disarmed her. She persisted. "Did you know my daughter hasn't spoken to anyone in almost a year?" "I assumed," he replied, "but she hums near the music room, barely audible." I remained silent, occupied with the task of fixing a loose tile. The following day, she moved closer and eventually she asked, "Do you enjoy stories?" Reagan's eyes widened. She spoke in a barely audible whisper. He nodded and she affirmed with a yes. A long silence stretched between them. Gabe then added softly, "Sometimes children stop talking not because they're broken, but because no one truly listens." Reagan tightened her jaw. "You have no concept of what she's endured," she thought. "You're right," he replied, meeting her gaze. "But I understand the sound of silence when it's not a voluntary absence." Reagan hesitated, uncertain whether to challenge or... She didn't cry. Instead, she turned and walked away, issuing a clear command. Stay away from her. Yet, even as she departed, her daughter's gentle, authentic voice lingered in her mind. A whisper of, "See you tomorrow." For the first time in a long while, Reagan was uncertain if she was escaping danger or a profound opportunity. The bell echoed through the halls of Bellhurst Academy, its sound precise and ringing, yet devoid of warmth. Gabe Blake kept his crouched position by the water fountain, observing the constant flow of sneakers, loafers, and polished flats rushing past him. Only Ivy, one of the students, spotted the janitor wielding a wrench. She paused a moment longer by the hallway corner, partially concealed by a marble column. Her gaze, inquisitive, watchful, and hesitant, locked with his. She didn't gesture or greet him, but offered a small, barely noticeable nod. Gabe returned a smile, then went back to tightening the loose fitting. Words weren't necessary. He'd spent a lifetime deciphering things others overlooked. The tremor in an inhale, the silence between spoken words, the glimmer in a child's gaze. Before they departed, everything remained as it was. His ears hadn't forgotten. He simply wasn't employing them in a clinical setting anymore. He utilized them here, amidst whispers, rustling leaves, and silence. "Gabe," a resolute voice called from behind him. "Reagan Moore." He slowly stood. "Ms. Moore?" he replied. She stood beneath the arched doorway, as if she possessed the stone itself. A flawless navy suit adorned her, arms crossed, jaw set firmly. Yet, her eyes revealed the sleepless night she'd endured. Too little rest, too many inquiries. "I need to speak," she stated, her voice low and private. He pointed towards the courtyard bench. "Over there won't do," she stated flatly. "Somewhere with a door." Gabe guided her down the hallway, past students entering the lunchroom, to a small, unused staff room that had a faint scent of old wood polish and dusty chalk. He shut the door behind them. Reagan remained standing. "I need to understand something," she said, moving restlessly. "My daughter has rejected every professional I've employed. Top therapists, renowned clinics, everything. And then, out of the blue, she starts talking to you. A janitor." Gabe arched an eyebrow. "You're saying janitor like it's some kind of illness?" "I express it casually, as if it weren't your job." He didn't respond, just nodded. Understandable. She waited, anticipated more, an apology, an explanation, anything. But he remained calm and composed. "Ivy doesn't speak. She kept her voice rising because she witnessed me crumble during the divorce, as I screamed and cried and slammed doors, vowing I never would. She saw her father leave. She heard me plead for him to return, and the day after, she went silent. The silence in the room grew, heavy and thick like water rising in a glass. Gabe was the first to break it. "That's not your fault," he said. Reagan's voice tightened. "Don't patronize me," he said, his tone sharp. "I'm not," he replied softly, but his words held a note of frustration. "But you're trying to fix her, as if she's damaged. She's not. She's simply defending herself." Her hands balled into fists. "So, what am I supposed to do? Just wait for her to speak to me? Hope she'll find it in her heart to forgive me enough to talk again?" Gabe observed her intently, then offered, "What if she's waiting for you to stop talking and truly listen to her?" Reagan's eyes widened. It was a simple statement, yet it struck him with the force of a revelation. He wasn't trying to argue or belittle or instruct. He simply stated the facts. She took a seat. Since Ivy's silence descended, she finally let herself soften, just slightly. "I don't know how to do that," she confessed, her voice now hushed. "I make my living with words, I command attention, I interrogate liars, I'm not a soft touch." Gabe pulled up a chair and sat opposite her, his elbows resting on his knees. "You don't need to be gentle," he said. "Just be present." Reagan kept her gaze fixed on the floor. "What made you stop practicing?" she asked, not meeting his eyes. His voice lowered to a near whisper. "My wife." She looked up. She possessed a singing voice, jazz, a voice style that it encourages you to close your eyes to truly hear. 2 weeks after our wedding, we discovered a lump in her throat. By then, the harm was irreversible. Reagan remained silent. He stated. "She lost her voice," he went on. "I exhausted all options. Therapy, experimental therapies, silent singing methods, you name it. But in the end, I understood I wasn't aiding her recovery. I was merely trying to prevent losing her." "And did you?" he affirmed. "Cancer didn't claim her. Silence did." The silence that now filled the room was crushing. "I'm sorry," Reagan murmured. Gabe offered a faint smile. "You're not the—" Only she held herself accountable for another's silence. A moment stretched between them. "Is that why you work here?" she inquired. "To be near what you lost?" He gazed out the small window. "I sought refuge here to fade away. But then Ivy sat beside me one afternoon while I was repairing a heater. She didn't utter a sound, just observed. The next day she brought a book, gestured to a sentence, then another. In a hushed tone she asked, 'Do you enjoy stories?' Reagan's voice faltered. That was her initial communication with him. He gave a slight nod. Since she was 4 years old, she hasn't shared that statement with anyone else. Gabe locked eyes with her. It wasn't directed at me. It was her silent plea, 'Will you share this quiet with me?' And I complied. Reagan rose gracefully. There were no legal battles here, no intense questioning, merely two individuals in a room filled with dust, attempting to mend something they had both lost. Before departing, she inquired of Will, 'Do you still speak to her?' Gabe smiled softly, 'Only if she wishes me to.' That evening, Ivy sat on her bed, knees drawn to her chest, a crayon clutched in her hand. Reagan gently knocked and entered, refraining from asking. She didn't apologize. Instead, she settled beside her daughter and asked, 'Do you enjoy stories?' Ivy lifted her gaze, her lips parting ever so slightly, and, for the first time in what felt like forever, she extended her hand to grasp her mother's. The following morning, Reagan Moore entered her downtown office, clad in a tailored gray suit, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Typically, her thoughts were organized like a courtroom, disciplined and efficient, but today they were a chaotic jumble. Each time she attempted to put aside their conversation from the day before with Gabe, Blake, a fleeting memory surfaced. Evie's hushed words, Gab's intense gaze. That understated statement, spoken without breaking the silence, had shielded her. It was a sound she couldn't unlodge from her mind. She reached for her office door, but before she could settle in, her assistant, Jenna, appeared. "Good morning, Ms. Moore. Your 9 o'clock deposition has been canceled. Should I reschedule the Coleman consultation?" Reagan shook her head. "No, leave it as is. I require 30 minutes of solitude." She sat at her desk, her gaze fixed on the screen. A blank search bar, its cursor blinking insistently. She then carefully typed in Gabriel Blake, licensed speech. Pathologist Noy delved into the wealth of information, results, news articles, testimonials. even a 6-year-old conference video. She clicked play, and the image froze on a younger Gabe, clean-shaven, in a black blazer, his posture radiating confidence. The caption read, "Restoring lost voices, rewiring silence after trauma." However, it wasn't the presentation itself that captivated her, but the quote pinned beneath it, seemingly from a Q&A session. "When a child stops speaking," it stated, "don't ask what's wrong with them. Consider what the silence is attempting to convey." Reagan reclined, his eyes. The sting of his words lingered. She was torn between gratitude and the urge to demolish a wall. Later that day, she discreetly called Bellhurst. "Miss Moore," the receptionist replied. "Evie's doing well. No problems today. However, that's not the reason for my call. I need access to Mr. Blake's employment file." A moment of silence followed. "I'm not certain if that's permissible. I serve on the school's legal board." Reagan fabricated a plausible excuse. "It's a compliance issue." 10 minutes later, a redacted PDF appeared in her inbox. She clicked it open, and there it was. Gabriel Elias Blake, of July 14th. In 1983, she had been a licensed speech-language pathologist, holding a master's degree in communication sciences and disorders from Columbia University. Her employment at Mount Sinai Children's Hospital ended with a voluntary resignation. The reason cited was personal bereavement, with no incident report filed. Reagan's gaze fell upon the references. The last one listed was Malene Blake, a former patient and spouse, now deceased. Her stomach sank. There was no record of disciplinary action, no scandal, no accusations. He had simply disappeared. That evening, Reagan cooked up some grilled cheese sandwiches, the single dish Ivy always cleaned her plate with. They dined by the living room window, gazing at the city skyline, a line of imposing structures watching over them. Ivy ate quietly, her gaze never straying from the twinkling lights. "Did you enjoy your book group today?" Reagan inquired. Ivy nodded. "Did Mr. Blake make any more amusing remarks?" Pause. He then said softly, "Silence is like a blanket, but you still feel the chill if no one's sharing it with you." Reagan was taken aback. She gazed at her daughter, taking in more than just the delicate features and the air of a girl who seemed too wise for her years. But truly, she saw her and inquired, "Do you believe he's correct?" Ivy turned her gaze. "I believe he doesn't speak to silence the quiet. He simply resides within it. That's more agreeable." Reagan's voice trembled before she could prevent it. "I wish I had done the same." Ivy rested gently against her shoulder. The subsequent day, Reagan went back to Bellhurst unannounced. She discovered Gabe in the supply closet arranging mop heads, with the precision of a surgeon preparing instruments. "You continue to astound me," he stated without lifting his eyes. "You keep appearing in my daughter's speech," she responded. "Therefore, I suppose we're square." He smiled faintly. "Is this another questioning?" she asked, holding up her phone. "No, this time I've done my research." He perked up. "You've read my file?" "I have." A pause followed. "And you know what he said?" "I do," she replied. "I know you lost her. I know you ceased practicing. And I know you didn't stop paying attention." He rested against the shelf. "That's all I was able to continue doing." Reagan sighed. "You once said that silence isn't a state of brokenness, but a form of protection." "Yes." She averted her gaze. "You were discussing Ivy, yet your conversation also encompassed. Didn't you understand?" Gab's stillness confirmed it. "I'm sorry," she murmured, her voice soft. "For your wife, for what I said, for thinking you were just a janitor," he said, his tone devoid of bitterness. She nodded in agreement. "You weren't mistaken," he replied. "I am a janitor, and it's the first job where no one anticipates me to resolve something beyond my capabilities." Reagan moved closer. "But you are mending something," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "Not just Ivy. Perhaps even me." He looked at her intently. Ivy didn't require fixing. She required someone who understood the pain of loss. Reagan swallowed the lump in her throat. "And you?" she inquired. "What was it you needed?" He paused, then admitted, "I needed to feel significant without having to save anyone." The space between them no longer felt oppressive. It was comforting. Gabe then murmured, almost as if to himself, "You know what the final thing my wife wrote to me was?" Reagan shook her head. "You hear what others overlook," he continued. "Don't let grief steal your ability to listen." He looked up, his eyes bright but without tears. "And for a time," he said, "I did." Reagan took a careful step back, selecting her words with care. "Could you ever envision yourself doing it?" "Again?" she inquired. "Therapy for Ivy, for others, for you." "I'm no longer licensed," he replied. "Then offer it without charge," she countered. "Do it for those who whisper, those like her." He contemplated her for a long, pensive moment, and then, in a hushed tone, "Only if someone sits with me this time?" She smiled. "I'm here." And for the initial time, so was he. Ivy's fingers glided over the keys of the antique upright piano in the school's music room. She wasn't performing a tune, more like evoking a recollection. Her delicate fingers sought a melody that existed only in. Her thoughts flowed, each note tentative and fragile. Outside, Gabe stood patiently with his mop, allowing the melody to envelop him like a faded childhood song. He remained outside, respectful of her solitude, and simply listened. Reagan sat in her car, the engine humming softly in front of Bellhurst. She wasn't meant to be there. Her schedule was full. But Ivy's gaze last night, the way her tiny fingers had clutched Reagan's hand with such intensity, wouldn't leave her mind. He doesn't speak to simply fill the... He was just sitting there, in quiet contemplation. Those words lingered in her mind. She exited the car. Within the school, she located Gabe in the hallway, a dustpan in his hand, standing outside the music room. "She's in there," Reagan inquired. He affirmed with a nod. "Third afternoon, consecutively." Reagan looked towards the door. "What's she playing?" A subtle smile touched his lips. "Not certain, but it sounds like her." Reagan crossed her arms, attempting to conceal the lump forming in her throat. "I never showed her how to play. We once had a keyboard at home, but it largely went unused. It wasn't getting played with." "She's remembering with her heart," Gabe remarked, gesturing to her hands. Reagan paused, contemplating his words. "I'm not certain I know how to do that," she confessed. Gabe faced her, offering a reassuring smile. "You will. Many people expect children to simply perform. Ivy simply desires to be understood." A few minutes later, Ivy appeared, holding a small folder filled with sheet music. Upon seeing her mother, she stopped and whispered, "You came." Reagan knelt down. "Of course I did." Ivy glanced over her shoulder at Gabe, who gave her a supportive nod. "Can we go to the park?" she asked. She inquired, "The one by the lake?" Reagan's eyes widened in. Astonishment washed over Reagan. Ivy hadn't expressed a desire to leave their home in almost a year. "We could," Ivy murmured, "right this instant." The lake sparkled under the late afternoon sun. Ducks drifted by, oblivious to the heaviness of our silence. Reagan settled on the bench next to Ivy, unsure of how to respond. But Ivy shattered the quiet. "Why did you stop listening to music?" Reagan looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Ivy asked, her voice low. "After Daddy left," she continued, "the house got so quiet. But not the good kind of quiet." Reagan let out a breath. "I was trying to avoid songs that brought back memories of what we once shared." Ivy gazed downwards. "I wondered if it was my fault." Reagan's breath hitched. "No," she said firmly, gently cupping her daughter's cheek. "Sweetheart, it was never your responsibility. I was attempting to be resilient. I believed silence indicated I was coping." Ivy leaned against her. "But occasionally it felt as though you vanished with him." Reagan's eyes closed, the painful reality striking her with greater force than any courtroom interrogation. "I apologize," she murmured. "I didn't intend to leave you in the solitude." That evening, Reagan discovered an antique box tucked away in the hallway closet. It contained sheet music. A dusty Bluetooth speaker sat beside her, untouched since the divorce, along with an old music box, a cherished heirloom from Ivy's grandmother. Slowly, she wound the music box, and a delicate melody emerged, fragile, high-pitched, and slightly imperfect. Yet, it was undeniably beautiful. Ivy rushed in from her room. "That's it," she exclaimed. "That's what I was trying to play on the piano." Reagan looked at her, stunned. You remembered that it played during bedtime stories before everything went quiet. Reagan knelt down, her eyes welling up with tears. I was unaware that you still held that memory. That sound lingered in the air. Ivy stared at her mother, a long silence stretching between them. I recall it all vividly. The following morning, Reagan approached the staff lounge door at Bellhurst. Gabe looked up from his work on a broken chair. "I have a request," she stated. He arched an eyebrow. "Will this land you in hot water?" "Possibly." "Then tell me." They found themselves together in the small, neglected music room that afternoon. Only Reagan, Gabe, and Ivy were present, without the constraints of paperwork, therapists, or confining walls. Ivy carefully positioned the music box atop the piano. "I'm eager to learn the whole song," she stated, "so I can get it right." Gabe grinned. "We can do that." He settled beside her, delicately indicating the keys. "Each note is like a word. Take your time. Just feel it." Reagan perched on a nearby bench, observing silently. This time, she didn't scribble notes, didn't dissect. She simply listened, and a sense of release started to well up inside her. As they strolled back towards the school parking lot, Reagan broke the quiet. "There's something I want to ask you," she told Gabe. "Sure. If this is how you're treating Ivy, if we were doing therapy, would you bill me for it?" He met her gaze with a kind smile. "No." "Excellent," she replied. "Because I'd prefer to call it something different. What would you suggest?" She halted her walk and looked directly into his eyes. "Redemption." That night, Ivy drifted off to sleep to the gentle melody of the music box, a sound both soothing and familiar, and for the first time in a very long while, Reagan allowed the music to continue playing long after the child had succumbed to slumber. The courtroom crackled with palpable tension, a feeling that settled heavy in your teeth. Reagan stood at its heart, as poised and alert as in a high-profile custody battle. Blade delivered her closing arguments with unwavering conviction. Her voice was resolute, her delivery impeccable, leaving no hint of the woman who had only days before comforted her daughter by a lake, apologizing for the quiet in their home. Yet, a transformation shimmered in her eyes. Each word spoken now stemmed from a wellspring deeper than mere strategy, emanating from a place that had been irrevocably altered. She won the case as expected, but the triumph lacked its usual resonance. That same evening, Gabe was in the process of fixing a broken bookshelf in the school library served as Gabe's sanctuary until he heard footsteps approaching. "I knew this is where you'd hide," Reagan murmured. He turned to face her. "You found me in the quietest spot on campus." "That's impressive." A small smile played on her lips as she moved closer. "I have a question for you." He inclined his head, encouraging her to speak. "When you're with her, when Ivy plays piano, or converses with you, or simply exists, what do you see?" Gabe pondered for a while before responding. "I observe a young woman striving to rediscover the essence of her voice, and Reagan saw her mother standing just beyond the outline of the figure, her expression filled with fear that she might shatter it. Reagan's breath caught in her throat. "I'm incapable of fulfilling her requirements," she thought. "You don't have to be all things to her," he said softly. "You simply need to be present and remain when she finally allows you in." They settled at the reading table. Reagan gazed around at the shelves, the aroma of aged paper and floor polish permeating the air. "These students, this school, they have no conception of who you once were." Gabe shrugged. "That's the beauty of it. But that's not about your identity." He looked up. "It's about who I—" She leaned forward, her elbows resting on the table. "You're still making a difference, Gabe," she stated. "You just traded in your medical degree for a mop." "I'm not saving anyone," he replied softly. "Just creating room for healing to happen. There's a distinction there." A quiet fell between them. Reagan then asked, "Do you long for your former life?" "Every day," he answered without pause, "but not in the way people assume. I don't miss the seminars or the accolades. I miss the feeling of a child discovering their voice for the first time. The sparkle in their eyes, not in response to their words, but because they made that decision, Reagan swallowed hard. Ivy never voluntarily chose to communicate with me again, that much is certain." Gabe corrected, That's not accurate. She simply didn't express herself verbally. A pause stretched between them. Reagan then asked softly, "What about you? When was the last time someone truly listened to you?" Gabe offered a smile, but it held a hint of deep sorrow. Before her illness, he met her gaze. Then, perhaps, it's overdue for someone to listen. The following day, Gabe discovered a small package outside his custodial closet. There was no accompanying note. Within, a pre-owned copy of The Velveteen Rabbit resided. Its spine-worn pages were slightly... The book was yellowed with age. A sticky note was tucked inside the front cover. "Because real things can't be unattractive. They're simply loved in unique ways," it read. Ivy had shared this with him the previous night. "Thought you should know," it concluded, signed simply R. He pondered the note for an extended period. He hadn't revisited that story since his wife was living. She would always tear up at that particular line. Once you are real, you can't become unreal again. It lasts forever. That evening, Gabe sat in his modest apartment, the book in his hands. The city throbbed with life outside, but within his apartment, a profound silence reigned. He turned the pages deliberately, each one after the other, as if he carefully unearthed parts of himself he had hidden away. Finally, upon reaching the last page, he murmured to the empty air, "I no longer wish to be unseen." The next morning at Bellhurst, Ivy sat silently in the piano room, her fingers poised above the keys. Reagan observed from the doorway, unnoticed. "I can't recall the middle section," Ivy mumbled, her gaze fixed on the sheet music. Gabe settled beside her. "Just skip it then. Play the part you do remember." "It won't be flawless," she said. Gabe returned a smile. Lover's music isn't crafted from perfection. It's made of... A feeling washed over Reagan, and in that moment, her heart understood more than her carefully crafted words ever could. For years, Reagan had strived for perfection in every aspect of her life, honing her responses and defenses to a fine point. Yet, here was this man, assuring her daughter that it was all right to be imperfect and still deserving of love. Ivy started to play, her music raw and uncertain, but laced with a glimmer of hope that brought tears to Reagan's eyes. And just then, Gabe glanced towards the doorway. He saw her. Reagan remained still, but Gabe offered a subtle nod, an unspoken invitation. This time, she remained, refusing to leave. As the music faded, Ivy raised her gaze. Was that permissible? Gabe whispered something to her that Reagan could barely discern. That wasn't acceptable. It was genuine. As they exited the school, Reagan turned to him and stated, "You didn't merely alleviate her quietude. You instructed me on how to dwell in my own..." He cast a glance at her. "Do you comprehend how uncommon it is for someone like you to stop and listen?" She offered a smile. "I'm making an effort." Gabe nodded. "That's sufficient." And for the initial time in a protracted period, the barriers between them didn't appear so insurmountable. The room thrummed with a low murmur. Whispers, tinged with suspicion, filled the air. Purst's parent advisory board gathered around a long, polished table in the library, each clutching paper agendas, yet their attention was clearly drawn to something unspoken. Reagan recognized the expression, a blend of worry and disdain, one she'd encountered herself in courtrooms. Presiding over the table was Mrs. Callahan, the board chair, exuding an aura of impeccable posture, a pearl necklace, and a subtly wielded authority born from experience. Reagan remained unfazed. She was accustomed to battlefields veiled in genteel conduct and veiled criticisms. But this, it wasn't about her standing. This concerned Ivy and Gabe directly. "Several complaints have come in," Callahan stated, her voice smooth yet sharp. "Unconventional conduct. Unsupervised interactions between students and custodial staff." "You mean Gabe?" Blake asked Reagan. A moment of silence. "Yes," Callahan replied cautiously. "Mr. Blake." Reagan crossed her arms. "Is there a grievance from my daughter?" "No, but from her teacher, the principal, from anyone truly informed about what's occurring." An uncomfortable silence descended upon the room. a man situated near the back. Reagan didn't discriminate between a dentist or a hedge fund manager. Her indifference was clear as she cleared her throat. "It's not personal, Ms. Moore," she stated. "It's about image, about how we appear. This institution has standards." Reagan leaned in, her voice devoid of emotion, her words carrying a chilling weight. "Let me tell you what I see," she continued. "A man who assisted my daughter in finding her voice when other experts failed. A janitor who never sought recognition, payment, or attention. Simply a safe haven, a place for a child to find solace." Callahan let out a weary sigh. "And yet," he conceded, "it's unconventional. The board must evaluate potential dangers." Reagan's her lips curved into a frosty smile. "You crave risk? Consider the plight of a mother watching her daughter withdraw, knowing every specialist has fallen short. Imagine being her, feeling unheard. That's true risk. And you want to dismiss the one person who finally took action, all because of appearances." No one spoke. Then the door creaked open. A secretary leaned in, murmuring something to Callahan. Her brow furrowed. "There's been an incident in the common area. 2 students had a dispute." Reagan sprang to her feet. "Could it be Ivy? I'm pretty sure it is." The hallway was a scene of utter pandemonium. A hush fell over the students, their whispers barely audible. Teachers rushed past, and a security guard kept the crowd at bay. Reagan's heart pounded as she reached the glass-walled commons. There she saw her daughter, Ivy, standing beside a slightly older girl who was touching her cheek. Ivy's hands were tightly balled, her face ashen. But it was the sound that stopped Reagan in her tracks, her daughter's voice. "Stop!" Ivy was demanding, her voice loud, clear, and trembling. "She knocked my book off the table. I requested she cease doing that 3 times. She hadn't." The girl sitting next to her appeared shocked. It was just a jest. She was certain it wasn't. Ivy lost her composure. "She knew I despise it when individuals touch my belongings without permission." The principal approached, but before he could utter a word, Reagan was already inside. She moved with calm deliberation. There were no tears. She knelt beside Ivy, gently resting her hand on her shoulder. "I heard you," Reagan stated. "Every single word." Ivy's eyes welled up with a potent and unfamiliar force. Not through aggression or rebellion, but through the newfound strength of a child who had simply decided to speak, and vowed to never be silenced again. "She wouldn't listen," Ivy murmured, "so I made sure she understood." Reagan pulled her into an embrace. "I'm so proud of you." Back in the conference room, Callahan cleared her throat. "I think this alters the situation." "No," Reagan stated, standing up. "This illuminates the situation." Ivy didn't just voice her opinion. She championed it, because someone had empowered her to believe her words held weight. She faced the board. "If you dismiss Gabe Blake, you won't simply be silencing a janitor. You'll quiet every child like Ivy who ultimately, they feel important. So, make your decision, but do it with awareness of who you're choosing to ignore." She departed before they could respond. That evening, Reagan found herself outside the janitor's closet. The hallway was deserted, silent. She tapped once. Gabe opened the door, his shirt rolled up to his elbows and a pencil tucked behind his ear. "I heard you," he murmured. "You always do," she answered. Her voice, at first a whisper, grew into a powerful declaration. Reagan stated, her eyes sparkling. He let out a chuckle, a sound she realized she cherished. She employed her voice. She continued. And she didn't employ it for singing, whispering, or to appease anyone. She utilized it to draw a boundary. Gabe rested against the doorframe. "That's the most potent application of language," he mused, "when it serves as a shield." Reagan gazed at him, truly seeing him, and then, without hesitation, she moved closer. "I believe you've dedicated so much time to helping others find their voice," she stated, "that you've forgotten you have something to say yourself." He blinked. "Like what?" she pressed. "Like how you feel about this place. About her. About me." A moment of silence passed. Then Gabe responded softly. "I have the sense that I've been situated in a hallway, bridging the past, and the future held no allure? For the first time, Reagan felt no desire to return. Reagan's voice softened. Then, don't. That night, in Ivy's room, the music box hummed a gentle melody. Ivy nestled into her bed, a crayon clutched in her hand, sketching something in the margins of her notebook. Reagan peered in. Can I see? Ivy turned the notebook to reveal a drawing. 3 figures, a bench, a music box placed centrally, and above them, in unsteady handwriting, the words, "Thank you for hearing me." Reagan kissed her forehead and murmured, "Always." For the very first time, a smile graced Ivy's face as she slept. A gentle drumming of rain against Reagan's office windows resembled fingers tracing patterns on the glass, streaking down as the storm swept over the city in undulating waves. Despite the tempestuous weather, an unsettling silence had enveloped her, a stillness that felt as tangible as a second skin. At her desk, the dimmed lights cast shadows over the untouched documents. Her phone vibrated twice, a message from a senior partner requesting her input before the Simmons deposition, urging her with a "they're waiting." She remained unresponsive. Instead, her gaze fell upon a framed photograph on her bookshelf. Ivy, at the tender age of 4, she used to laugh with abandon. That was a lifetime ago, before the quiet descended, before the divorce, before Reagan erected walls so formidable that not even her daughter's voice could breach them. Yet something within her had changed, and today she was lost, unsure how to reverse the shift. The Simmons deposition in court was harrowing, not due to any legal complexities. Reagan could dismantle a hostile witness effortlessly, but because she felt nothing. She detected her own voice, sharp and interrogative, dissecting her tone and refining her cadence to perfection. Yet it felt like observing another perform a play she no longer subscribed to. She felt a pang. "Objection, Your Honor." "Irrelevant," came the prompt reply, swiftly sustained. The proceedings unfolded with mechanical precision, yet a fissure appeared when the opposing counsel leaned in. "Miss Moore, you appear distracted today." The atmosphere shifted. She composed herself, her voice steady. Distracted attorneys still achieve victory. "Let's continue," she thought, though inwardly she was already elsewhere. That evening, Reagan remained in her kitchen, unmoving, holding an untouched glass of wine as she gazed out at the city, its lights shimmering through the rain. She had no appetite, neither for food nor conversation. She barely registered when the front door opened. Mom Ivy's voice, soft and familiar, called out, "I'm home." Reagan jumped, surprised. "You're early," she said. "Mr. Gabe walked me home. He stayed downstairs." Reagan nodded, bending down to assist Ivy in removing her rain-soaked boots. Ivy then inquired, "Why are you feeling down?" Reagan hesitated. "I'm not sad, honey, just tired," she replied. Ivy tilted her head as if considering. "But your voice sounds like it's concealing something." Reagan blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "It's similar to when I would whisper in the past, not due to an inability to speak, but my hesitation stemmed from a fear of how it would be received." The words resonated with the force of thunder in a hushed space. Reagan settled down, and for the first time in ages, she relinquished her facade of strength. "I think," she stated slowly, "I've spent so much time speaking that I've forgotten how to express what truly matters." Ivy rested her head on her mother's shoulder. "It's all right," she murmured softly. "Mr. Gabe says grown-ups sometimes forget, but voices aren't gone, just waiting." The following morning, Reagan stayed away from the office. Alternatively, she strolled through the tranquil halls of Belhurst. A visitor badge adorned her coat. She paused in the doorway of the old music room, where Gabe was assisting Ivy with her finger placement on the keys. Reagan remained by the entrance. Gabe looked up, their gazes locking. Without a word, she simply presented a small, folded note. He approached, carefully taking it and unfolding it. Inside, written in her handwriting, was the message, "Would you like to have coffee with someone who's finally learning how to listen?" He looked up at her. "I thought you only drank espresso," he playfully remarked. "I've downgraded," she responded. "I'm making an effort to be more gentle." He grinned. "You're not." "Sharp, Reagan," he said. "You're simply impenetrable." She chuckled softly. That's not a compliment. It is, he replied, because armor can be taken off. Stone cannot be. They encountered each other that evening at a modest cafe nestled on a side street near the park. No courtroom formality, no facades, just two individuals out of their roles attempting to recall who they were before life taught them to shield everything. Reagan took a sip of her drink. This is peculiar, she mused. What is conversation without an objective? Gabe smiled. That's how you know it's significant. She gazed at him. In the past, I used to believe words were weapons. Now I'm contemplating if they were always bridges, and I simply failed to traverse them. He swirled his coffee. My spouse once remarked, the most potent aspect of a conversation isn't the uttered words, but the pauses between them. Reagan leaned closer. You yearn for her. Each day, he responded plainly. But I don't dwell in the void of her absence. I reside in the realm of remembrance. A moment of quiet. Do you believe, Reagan inquired tentatively, that someone like me can be granted forgiveness for not listening sooner? Gab spoke in a soft voice. Forgiveness isn't something that is deserved, it's a gift. And, based on what I've witnessed, Ivy has already extended that gift to you. Reagan's eyes glistened. However, I haven't found forgiveness within myself. Then, in a gentle tone, he stated, you need to listen to your own voice, the one you've hidden beneath all the correct responses. As they left, the air carried the scent of rain-drenched earth. The streets were still, and for a change, Reagan didn't feel compelled to break the silence until Gabe remarked, You're doing it. She looked up. Doing what? Expressing yourself even without uttering a word. And at that moment, Reagan Moore, a woman who had constructed her life around flawless logic, understood that vulnerability wasn't a sign of weakness, but rather the most courageous form of honesty. And, for the first time, she was prepared to embrace it. The sky above Burst was unusually gentle that morning, veiled with clouds but radiating warmth, as if the world itself had paused, taking a moment to simply exist. Inside the library, Evie sat at a corner table, her legs tucked beneath her, a yellow pencil held between her fingers in thoughtful contemplation. Surrounding her, students murmured, pages rustled, and keys clicked. She clicked, but Ivy remained lost in contemplation. A pristine blank page lay before her. Who is your hero? Reagan appeared earlier that afternoon than usual, having taken the rest of the week off, a first in what felt like an eternity. Her heels lacked their usual confident click. Instead, they moved softly and steadily, as if the woman wearing them had finally allowed herself to ease up. Gabe greeted her near the entrance. She's in the library, he stated before she could inquire. Reagan offered a subtle smile. Of course she is. I think she's working on something significant, Gabe remarked. She always is, Reagan replied quietly. As she prepared to leave, he softly touched the edge of her sleeve. She observes you, you know, he stated. When you're not aware. Reagan looked at him. What do you mean? Like when you enter the room, she adjusts her posture. She sits up straighter. She desires to be worthy of your attention. Reagan felt a constriction in her throat. I never intended to make her feel that way. I understand, Gabe replied, but even love can sometimes be shielded. Gabe swallowed, a warm smile in his eyes. And now, he said. She's finally writing freely again. Back in the library, Ivy looked up as her mother came closer. May I sit here? Reagan inquired. Ivy gave a nod, then paused. But please don't start reading it just yet. Of course not, Reagan replied, neatly placing her hands in her lap. Ivy's smile widened. It's small, but it's definitely present. They enjoyed 10 peaceful minutes of quiet companionship, Reagan observing her daughter's pencil gracefully move across the page, occasionally pausing before resuming its work. At last, Ivy breathed out. Finished. Do you want... Can I read it now? Reagan inquired. Ivy declined, stating, I'd prefer Mr. Gabe to read it first. They located him in the music room, meticulously tuning an old violin in preparation for the spring recital. Ivy silently presented him with the folded paper. He received it with utmost care, as if it were made of fragile glass. Then, with deliberate slowness, he read, My hero is Mr. Gabe. He explained that his heroism doesn't involve capes or tools. He fixes things through the power of listening. He listened to me when no one else was able to understand me. He never demanded I speak louder, only that I be truthful. He demonstrated to me that silence is not something to be feared, and communication isn't about proving you're right. It's about being authentic. He's my hero because he never attempted to save me. He simply remained nearby until I found the strength to save myself. The room was utterly silent. Gabe gently folded the paper. His voice choked with emotion. "May I keep this?" Ivy replied. "It's yours." Reagan looked at her daughter, her eyes welling with tears. "You didn't even mention me." Ivy turned, surprised. "Mom, you're not my hero," Ivy stated simply. Reagan's expression faltered, but she masked her hurt. "You're my home," Ivy said. "Legends may fade, but home remains." That sentiment resonated eternally. Reagan remained speechless, only pulling her daughter close. As evening descended, Reagan found herself alone on her balcony, cradling an untouched cup of chamomile tea. The city throbbed softly in the distance. Her phone vibrated with a text from Gabe. "I haven't stopped reading it." She smiled to herself. After a pause, she responded. "She wrote about you, but her healing came from our bond." A swift reply arrived. "Then, let's continue writing her story together." Reagan contemplated the message. They lacked poetic flair and dramatic intensity, but their bond was steadfast, a silent promise, conveyed through simple gestures rather than grand pronouncements. That weekend, Reagan and Ivy strolled through the park, their hands intertwined. Spring was beginning to paint the landscape with its vibrant hues. Tiny green buds adorned the edges of trees, and a few daffodils boldly bloomed. Reagan paused beside a bench and gestured. "Isn't this the one?" Ivy affirmed with a nod. "The spot where we talked after piano." Reagan settled onto the bench. "You know, I still reflect on that day." "Me too. Do you recall what you shared with me?" Ivy nodded once more. "I stated that you had returned." Reagan met my gaze. "And I truly meant I decided to." Ivy dug into her small backpack and retrieved a folded piece of paper. "This is for you," she said, emphasizing it wasn't homework. Reagan unfolded it to reveal a drawing of a bench. Two women, one larger than the other, were depicted holding hands with a small, open music box nestled between them. Hearts, instead of musical notes, floated out of it. Ivy had written above the image, "Love doesn't always sound like a melody. Sometimes it sounds like someone who remains." Reagan's tears flowed gently, not in loud sobs, but with a more subdued expression of a silence bloomed, carrying more love than any utterance could express. Not far from that bench, Gabe Blake sat on his porch, a worn notebook page neatly folded in his jacket pocket, for he remembered a little girl who, having forgotten how to speak, found solace in writing. Through her, he learned that the most courageous stories aren't proclaimed, but whispered. The day's forecast had predicted a light drizzle, yet by evening the city was inundated. Torrential rain poured down across the Hearst campus was drenched, sidewalks slick, and bricks darkened by the encroaching twilight. Most families had already collected their children and hurried home. However, Reagan lingered beneath the covered walkway, unhurried. Her umbrella hung limply at her side, unused. She wasn't in a rush. She was lost in thought. And deep down, she was anticipating something that remained unspoken. Ivy burst across the courtyard, her backpack a rhythmic thump against her heels as she splashed through the puddles. She stopped beneath the archway, her breath coming in short gasps as she looked up at her mother. "You forgot your umbrella?" Reagan said, a half-smile playing on her lips. "I simply wanted to feel the rain," Ivy responded, her voice straightforward. Reagan gently brushed a strand of wet hair from her daughter's ear. "Ready to leave?" Ivy didn't reply right away. Instead, she inquired, "Mom, do you feel happy?" The question struck Reagan with the force of a physical blow. She stared, taken aback. Ivy looked at her earnestly. "Are you happy when you're being genuine?" They remained silent in the car a while, the only sound the windshield wipers ticking steadily like a metronome. Reagan's hands tightened around the steering wheel. Yet he made no move to start the engine. A wave of happiness washed over her, but she was unsure how to respond. The seasoned courtroom queen, the one who always had a schedule and a plan, was absent. The warrior within her, the one who would have offered a smooth, confident deflection, was nowhere to be found. In this moment, she had no prepared answer. Finally, she looked to Ivy and said, "I believe I've been so focused on protecting you, I neglected to inquire about what makes either of us feel secure." Ivy pondered this, tilting her head. "So, that's a no," she stated. Reagan let out a sigh. "That's an almost—" Forgoing the drive home, Reagan turned onto a side street. 15 minutes passed before they arrived at a recognizable parking lot. It was a school, but not Ivy's. Ivy furrowed her brow, perplexed. "Why are we here?" Reagan responded with a gentle smile. "Because I need to give you an answer." The hallway outside the music room was dimly lit and hushed, only the soft patter of rain against the windows and the low groan of an aging building sighing in the stormy air. Gabe sat at the piano, playing a slow, familiar tune. It was the lullaby from Ivy's music box, simple, not perfect, but constant. He paused when he noticed them. "You're early," he stated. Reagan advanced, her face betraying nothing. "Actually," she began, "we're late." "Late for what?" Reagan gazed at Ivy, then back at Gabe. A question lingered, one she should have posed much earlier. Gabe appeared unsure. Reagan took a deep breath. "Would you come to dinner with us?" she asked. "Not to discuss Ivy. Not to try and mend anything. Just to eat. To simply exist." Gabe's eyes widened. "You're inviting the janitor," he said. "I'm inviting the man who showed my daughter how to be courageous and taught me how to unlearn all the things that made me so closed off." He hesitated before responding, then finally murmured, "Okay." Dinner was slow, relaxed, and awkward, but in a good way. Gabe sat at the table as if he'd always... Ivy's chatter was more frequent than usual, covering topics like school, a new song she was practicing, and the raccoon that resided in the tree outside her classroom. Gabe listened attentively. Reagan observed, and for a change, the silences were undisturbed by noise. Once Ivy retired for the night, Reagan walked Gabe to the door. She paused, then confessed, "She asked me today if I was content." Gabe turned to her, and for a moment, he was speechless. He slowly nodded. "But during our meal," she went on, "I once believed that happiness was about success," he realized, wasn't about control. He now believed it was simply about selecting individuals who embody a silence that doesn't require filling. He smiled. "That's beautiful, truly." They stood in the peaceful stillness. Gabe then inquired, "And do I represent that kind of silence?" Reagan locked eyes with him. "You are that kind of silence." As he walked out into the light drizzle, she called after him. "Gabe," he turned, "if I asked you to try again, not in a professional capacity but as a person, would you?" He hesitated, then replied, "Only if you promise not to try to heal me." "I won't then," he replied, and with that, he turned and left. He walked into the rain, not in his role as janitor, but as a man finally moving towards his purpose, not fleeing from it. Above, Ivy lay awake, watching the rain streak down her window pane, and murmured into the darkness, "Please let this be true." And from the hallway, Reagan's voice, calm and reassuring, replied, "It already is." In a world saturated with clamor, they had all rediscovered the art of listening, and in that rediscovery, happiness took root. Gabe Blake's initial return to a classroom was an unconventional one. He entered without a degree, without a license, and without... He wasn't anticipating the usual fanfare this time. No podium, no clipboard in hand. Instead, he found himself seated on the floor, legs crossed, beside a circle of children who had come to trust him, not for his position, but for the genuine connection they shared. And, right next to him, perched in a miniature folding chair labeled "Assistant," sat Ivy, pencil tucked behind her ear, clipboard resting on her lap, tiny shoes swaying above the tile. She wasn't merely assisting, she was a co-leader in her own right. Reagan stood quietly in the doorway, observing them from behind the glass. A spotlight wasn't present in this. The room was hushed, no applause, only soft voices attempting to grasp profound emotions. A young boy was having difficulty enunciating his name. Gabe leaned closer and said softly, "Say it, like you're sharing a secret just between us." The boy grinned. He tried again, and this time he got it right. The children clapped, but it was Ivy who murmured, loud enough for her mother to hear, "That's what it feels like to be truly listened to." Later, as the session ended, the principal intercepted Reagan in the hallway. "I wasn't convinced about this idea at the beginning," he confessed. "However, no matter what you—" Reagan nodded in agreement. "And Mr. Blake has created something truly special. It's working wonderfully. The children absolutely love him." The principal tilted his head, pondering. "Do you think he'll want to make this official? We'd be happy to support a part-time therapeutic program if he's interested." Reagan smiled. "I believe he will, but not for the sake of the title." "Then why?" She looked back into the room. "Because he's realized he still has valuable contributions to make." That evening, Gabe found himself standing outside Reagan's apartment, clutching a package wrapped in brown paper and twine. He was uncharacteristically restless, his voice soft as she opened the door. "This is for Ivy," he murmured. Reagan accepted it delicately. "What is it?" he asked. "An old keepsake. I thought she might like to use it for her own." Nestled inside was a well-worn, leather-bound notebook, adorned with hand-etched music notes along the borders of each page. "She used to play pieces from it," he said, unaware that they were mine. Reagan traced her fingers over the aged pages. "It's your wife's, isn't it?" she asked. He confirmed with a nod. As her voice faded, it was the final thing she scribbled down. Reagan stared at him, her expression laced with surprise. "You're giving—" "No," he replied softly. "I'm passing it along." That evening, Ivy found herself on the living room rug, the notebook spread before her. Gabe sat beside her, demonstrating how to decipher the scrolled annotations, markings only a practiced eye could understand. Reagan observed from the couch, then murmured, "For years I've argued to judges that words hold weight, but recently I've come to believe how we employ them is more important than anything else." Gabe looked up. "Words are akin to songs. Their aim isn't to impress, it's to foster a sense of connection," Reagan affirmed with a nod. "Silence isn't the foe, then." "No," he responded. "It's the foundation." As Ivy drifted off to sleep that night, her music notebook resting beside her pillow, Reagan stood at her bedroom door, arms crossed, her heart overflowing. "She's overcome her fear of her own voice," she murmured. Gabe joined her side. "Because someone showed her it held value." Reagan met his gaze. "And you're not afraid to share yours once more?" He offered a gentle smile, for someone had patiently listened long enough. The subsequent week, Gab's narrative unfolded. A sound pilot program debuted at Pirst. Foregoing a traditional launch with ribbons, media, or fanfare, the event was intimate. 10 children, 2 vintage instruments, a music box playing softly on the piano, and a chalkboard proclaiming, "Tell it how you feel it, even if it's quiet." Reagan observed from the back of the room during the initial session. Her presence wasn't supervisory. She was there to simply observe. As Ivy guided a new student in discovering her first note on the keyboard, Reagan experienced a sense of calm and completeness settle within her. She looked at Gabe, and he returned her gaze. Their eyes met, conveying a message without a single word spoken. It was clear. This was a life they hadn't realized they could still create. That night, bathed in the soft glow of lamplight and surrounded by worn couches, Reagan posed a question to Gabe. If given the chance to rewrite his past, before the silence, the pain, the loss, would he? Gabe pondered for a while, then replied, "No." Reagan's eyebrow arched in surprise. "Why not?" he asked. Gabe's voice was low and resolute as he explained, "Because if I changed any page, perhaps I overlooked the chapter where you made your entrance." Outside, the city held its breath in silence. Inside, a home, once a place of hushed stillness, was now awakening to the sound of music. The auditorium thrummed with a low, anticipatory buzz. the kind that fills a space before something significant unfolds. Folding chairs lined the gleaming wooden floor, while stage lights cast a warm glow on the red velvet curtain. Parents leaned forward, eager, and teachers held their breath. It was the end-of-year ceremony at Belhurst Academy. Yet for a young girl seated near the front, her shiny black shoes swinging nervously, this was more than just a ceremony. It marked the start. Behind the scenes, Ivy held tightly to a folded piece of paper rested in her hands, her fingers quivering slightly, not from fear, but a profound sense of anticipation. Gabe knelt beside her, his tie askew, his demeanor serene. "You're not obligated to read anything at all," he murmured softly. "Only the parts that resonate with you today." Ivy met his gaze. "What if I can't recall them?" "Then, let your words flow from the place where they still reside within you," he replied. "That's where the most genuine expressions arise." She gave a curt nod, then faced her mother, who had just entered backstage, a gentle smile gracing her lips, and her eyes already sparkling. "Mom," Ivy said, her voice soft yet determined, "will you be somewhere I can see you?" Reagan lowered herself to meet her daughter's gaze. "I'll be in the front row. I promise I'll always be where you can see me again." As the principal took the stage, he greeted the audience, expressed gratitude to the staff, and lauded the accomplishments. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Then, the final announcement was made. For the first time this year, a student will deliver our closing speech, their story serving as a reminder that finding your voice isn't about speaking the most loudly, but rather about speaking when it's truly necessary. The significance of the moment was palpable. A hush descended upon the room, and now Ivy Moore entered the spotlight. For a brief instant, the room seemed to suspend its breath. She surveyed the audience, locating her mother in the front row, and Gabe standing off to the side. Unfolding the worn paper in her grasp, she commenced. "Hello, I'm Ivy. I was once reserved, not because I lacked something to express, but because I wasn't sure if anyone desired to listen. Then someone did. He was the janitor. He wore worn shoes and possessed a gentle manner of sitting, accompanied by a comfortable silence as if it were a familiar companion. He made no request for me to speak. He remained, and, inexplicably, that made me want to stay as well. The room was utterly silent. You could have heard the faintest sound. My mother is present too. She's a lawyer, an exceptionally skilled one. For a period, I believed she only listened intently in court, but now she listens everywhere, in the car, at bedtime, in moments of quiet. She shares stories she hadn't told me before, and occasionally when words fail her, she simply holds my hand. That, I've discovered, is even more comforting. I've learned that voices, like music, are not all the same. Some are boisterous, some are gentle, some remain hidden for extended periods. Time. But when they finally do, they are worthy of a haven. I'm grateful to Mr. Gabe for providing my voice with a haven, and thank you to my mother for nurturing its growth. I no longer fear speaking out because I now understand that perfection isn't required. I simply need to be myself. The room fell into a profound silence. Then applause erupted, not boisterous or overwhelming, but gradual and reverent, as if everyone was careful not to shatter the spell she had just cast. Gabe dabbed at his eyes, making no attempt to conceal his tears. Reagan stood, her hands clasped, a smile gracing her lips. Overcome with pride and amazement, Ivy curtsied shyly before rushing off stage and into Gab's embrace. "You did it," he murmured. "You said I would," she responded. Reagan joined them, pulling her daughter close. "You didn't just speak, darling," she said. "You captivated the entire room." Ivy looked from one to the other. "Can we go get pancakes now?" Gabe chuckled. Now that's a fitting conclusion. The summer air outside was warm, gentle, and liberating. Hand in hand, Reagan, Ivy, and Gabe strolled towards the parking lot, their unity a harmonious blend, like a melody finally complete. The moment held no speeches, no rituals, only a profound silence born of overflowing hearts. As they approached the car, Ivy looked up and inquired, "Is our story complete?" Reagan smiled while Gabe chimed in, "We are the story." "And the most wonderful thing is," Gabe continued, "we're still writing it. Some tales start with a voice, others with stillness. But the stories that resonate eternally are those where someone finally chooses to listen. The end, or perhaps just the beginning. It was the janitor who recognized her voice even before she uttered a word. A tale of silence, healing, and the profound strength required for genuine listening are at the heart of this experience. We'd love to know your perspective. From where are you joining us? Which aspect of this narrative resonated most deeply with you? Was it Ivy's initial words, Gab's quiet wisdom, or Reagan's transformation from strength to presence? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your insights help us craft stories that hold meaning. For more inspiring healing stories like this one, be sure to subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon to receive notifications for every new episode. And remember, most importantly, please share this video with anyone who could use a boost of hope today. We truly appreciate you taking the time to be here with us. We see you, we hear you, and we feel privileged to share these stories with you.